You are, and you are. Okay, hello everyone, wherever you are, and you are from all around the world. This is what's so exciting, I think, about the Research Innovations and Sustainable Marketing Symposium. It is global, and we just welcome you. Along with my fellow co-chairs, I would like you to welcome you to the first Research Innovations and Sustainable Marketing Symposium, or what we affectionately refer to as RISM2023. Sponsored by the Shidler College of Business and 21 other universities around the world, RISM 2023 brings together top research scholars in the field of sustainable marketing. Over 3 days and 3 hours each day from GMT 13 on, these scholars will share their expertise on plenary panels and in multiple concurrent research presentation sessions. And on day 3, you'll have the opportunity to come together in the Zoom room of your choice, depending on your interest area in sustainable marketing, to meet with your other colleagues who have similar interests and to form research collaborations going forward. Before I introduce our 2 keynote speakers, who we're really excited to have, please note that our plenary sessions, which is what this one is, are using Zoom webinar format, while our research paper concurrent sessions will use Zoom meeting format. This means that on the webinar format, only our speakers will be seen on the screen. However, in the meeting format, audience participants in those paper presentation sessions will be seen as well, unless, of course, the presentation is underway. All of our sessions are moderated, and whether you are in a webinar or a meeting, we ask that you please keep your microphone muted and place whatever questions or comments you may have in the messaging chat box that you will see when you join the session. We'll save all those chat box information and we'll share that information with our speakers so that even if your question or comment is not addressed during the session, you will have the opportunity to interact with the speaker of interest following RISM 2023. Last, I would be remiss if I didn't thank up front our amazing RISM 2023 coordinator, Professor Ahmed Al-Jarrah, who has for countless hours spent time ensuring that the symposium has state-of-the-art online conferencing capabilities. We're all volunteers, and I think he's just done an amazing job. So many, many thanks to Ahmed. Now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our 2 keynote speakers, Professor Jag Sheth and Ms. Rebecca Marmont. Each keynote speaker will offer their thoughts about different aspects of sustainable marketing, scholarship, and practice. During their talks, feel free to message me as your moderator with your comments and or questions. And as I mentioned earlier, following their talks, I'll share as many of your comments and questions as I can with them as possible before we end the session. So let me start with Professor Jag Sheth. Professor Jag Sheth is the Charles H. Kelstadt Professor of Business in the Goizueta Business School at Emory University. He is globally known for scholarly contributions to consumer behavior, relationship marketing, competitive strategy, and geopolitical analysis. Professor Sheth has seen over 50 years of combined experience in teaching and research, and has authored more than 300 papers and several books, including titles in the sustainable marketing areas such as Genes, Climate, and Consumption Culture, and Connecting the Dots, which is 2017, and the Sustainability Edge 2016. Turning to Ms. Marmont, she is the Chief Sustainability Officer of Unilever. She is responsible for Unilever's sustainability strategy and implementation globally. This includes embedding sustainability across the functions and divisions, as well as heading external engagement, advocacy, and partnerships across Unilever's priority areas on climate and environment, health and well-being, and the social agenda. Rebecca is also non-executive director at WSUP, which is the Water Sanitation Project for the Poor, and Global Solidarity Fund, as well as a member of the Tent Advisory Council. I'd like to welcome you both to RISM 2023. And I'm going to applaud you, and I hope others are doing it on their Zoom in. And we'll begin with Professor Jag Sheth. Professor Sheth, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dana. And thanks for having a great colleague. Rebecca is excellent. The background is just fantastic. but more importantly, her passion really in this field about sustainable marketing. So Rebecca, I really am very thankful to having you join me in this session. Second reason is very interesting because Dana, I think it's 3 o'clock in the morning for you, right?
It is. That's okay.
So I hope that we didn't keep you awake so long. So this is great. Thank you again. And as you know, I have a nickname called Jag, as in Jaguar. And ever since that association, I've been dreaming of owning a Jaguar with a license plate Jags Jag. Okay. I've been still wanting a car. I haven't got a chance to get it. Many years ago, I'm 84 now. So, but when I turned 60, my 2 grown-up children and their spouses surprised me. I don't count my birthdays. I went out and I saw this beautiful Jaguar, top of the line, even the color I like, parked in the driveway with a handwritten license plate, Jags Jag, happy 60th birthday. Unfortunately, it turned out to be a rental car. So I'm still looking for my Jaguar, okay? So here are some key observations on sustainable marketing or sustainability in general. I will talk more broader picture, and I know Rebecca will talk about marketing aspects and especially about circular economy, which I think is very key platform for practicing as well as conceptualizing or doing research in the academic world. The first point is that global warming is real. I think there is not too many deniers anymore. There's an overwhelming consensus that something is happening which is unprecedented. There's overwhelming scientific and field observation evidence that it is an existential threat. In other words, it is something that we cannot delay too long before the earth collapses itself. There is also a growing consensus, and this is where the debate starts, that this is a direct side effect of industrialization. In other words, the recent sustainability global warming issue is really man-made rather than a natural phenomenon. And I think that's very important. And I'll come to that point in a more significant way. Overexploitation of natural resources for economic growth is not sustainable as China, India, and especially Africa transition from the agricultural to the industrial age. This is really a consequence of the industrialization, which really began about 200 years ago, let's say. And numbers are incredible. For example, the global warming household operations contributes about 35% of global warming, 32% air pollution, 21% water pollution, and habitat alternation for land use is about 4%. Food production itself is about 12% for global warming, 17% for air pollution, 38% for water pollution, and 45% for habitat alteration for land use. Those are the 4 ingredients I talked about as indications, with global warming being the main focus. Transport is 32% for global warming contribution. Air pollution, 28% contribution by transportation systems. Water is about 7%, and habitat alteration for land use is about 15%. Surprisingly, the largest source of global warming is not in the factory, is not interstate transport or global transport, shipping, air travel, etc., but it is at home. 70% of total global warming, automobile included as a part of personal possession, for example, is that much, which means we have really not understood the consumption side as we are focused so much on the production side, and maybe logistics, distribution, and public policy. So how did this happen? Industrial revolution made one major consequence. That was to separate production from consumption. Pre-industrialization, we produced in the same location as we consumed, and there was no storage of food or product that we made So it was a daily production, daily consumption. But as we separated significantly between production and consumption because of excess capacity, mass production, automation, whatever happened, fortunately, because of that, we now created a transport system in place and carbon footprint began to happen from production, storage, transportation, and consumption. We assume that nature is passive. The first major reason is the divorce between production and consumption. And is it possible for us to put the production and consumption back again, daily produce, daily consume, with the same economies of scale that mass production does it? And the answer is it's very possible. We assume that nature is passive, which is the biggest mistake we made. In the industrialization, we believe that nature is inorganic because we are looking for industrial raw materials like copper, coal, iron, oil, etc., which takes thousands of years biologically to form what they are. And therefore, we extracted too much industrial raw materials without regard to its impact on environment. They can renew, but they renew over hundreds of thousands of years, as opposed to renewing like plants, for example, within 10 years, whole forestry could be redone, etc., which again is a very key issue to think about. That we had a very different understanding of the industrial engineering, essentially in some fashion, and we over-extracted in the process. We had one more belief system which still prevails, that we as human beings are superior to all other species. I think this is a very key area, that humans are most superior living organisms, and therefore everybody else has to be subordinate, sacrifice themselves for the sake welfare of the human beings. And I think that principle has to be re-challenged and questioned, that every living, breathing organism in the earth is equally important. There's a balanced ecosystem, and I think that's where circular economy may come in, as Rebecca will talk about. Nature is biological, it's living, breathing, and regenerative. There is a complex ecosystem with self-governance mechanism. Can we understand that self-governance mechanism and try to emulate us as humans, rather than humans saying that I have the intelligence, the cognitive capacity, I can invent, I can think things, and therefore I can interfere with the government, the complex governance ecosystem. Working with nature is better sustainable model than exploiting it. Like all living biological organisms, nature is also capable of passive resistance, which we have seen that thing. The more you abuse a living organism, the less they're willing to collaborate or cooperate with you. We have seen this happen in terms of human sufferings, for example. Animals, we have seen this thing, but this is true of every living organism. It's basically a non-cooperation, and what we need is a more and more cooperation among all the living organisms in an ecosystem, environmental ecosystem in some fashion. So abuse of nature is really not that positive for the human beings. So how do we get away from the theory that human is the most superior living organism? How can we get away from the theory that nature is inorganic? How can we get away from the theory that I can exploit it, overconsume, overproduce, and it'll be automatically regenerating? I think those are the key principles. The question is, how do we do it? There are three components or three parties. You have the producer on the one hand, consumer on the other hand, and a regulator or a policymaker on the third hand. We are trying to create this cooperation between public and private partnerships, which I think is fine, but it's a lot of give and take, and it takes a long time. To get the consensus among nations, as the Paris Convention clearly showed, while we may have an agreement, but when it comes to implementation, each nation is on their own. So my recommendation is that while we continue searching for some sort of a collaboration, it is not necessary to implement other things immediately. Each of the three stakeholders can do something, or marketing can intervene and have a marketing for a better world in the process from an environmental viewpoint. So what can production do? And we can talk about whether production is done from a market viewpoint, capitalism, shareholder value, etc., or is it based upon incentives that the government can give? I don't think we can wait for the incentives because that's a lot of debate, discussions, processes. The first major thing that I think producers of products, companies that manufacture, make things, is to increase the biodiversity. I studied this for the corn in America. At the turn of 1800s, roughly, there were 2,500 species of corn. By the end of the century, it was down to about 25 species. Think about that one. Now, what happens is that while for economies of scale, better breeding practices, however we do it, create hybrid seeds, whatever we do, but reduction of the biodiversity now has made that corn very susceptible to one mass disease. Very much like a pandemic for the human beings. Very much like the bird flu that happens, which did happen and had a chicken population had to be killed essentially. So biodiversity is a very key concept. It has been built into all cultures, in fact, surprisingly in the ancient area. And I think if companies can think about it, especially those who make products, to make sure that biodiversity is included in their thinking, strategic planning, I think it's very important. Second one is localized production. And I do believe that with the Toyota process, TQM, just-in-time, cycle time, customer satisfaction, 4 major elements. Today, I can produce in smaller quantities, localized production, and then still have the economies of scale, including mass customization, I can do it. I don't want to go into the details, but it's very possible that economies of scale don't have to be sacrificed to make production local, as local farmers are doing it, local restaurants sourcing locally, companies like Whole Foods, maybe Trader Joe, etc., those who are into environmentally organic products, etc., are able to do it, but it's very doable, which means I don't have to store it, I don't have to ship it out, etc., and economics will work in the process. But economists have to think differently, economies of scale concept, than what we have invented so far in economics. And the third one, of course, is shift to renewable resources. More and more in our production, if we can use renewable resources as much as possible, not just the energy per se, but there are lots of renewable resources out there in the production thinking, etc. I think the more the producers can contribute to our sustainable world going forward. What about policymakers? Policymakers have also many, many tools in their hands. First one they can do is to increase awareness. Who said marketer is the only one who can increase awareness about not only the crisis that we have, but the solutions, and saying, how can you be mindful consumer, etc. I think the governments can do it. And governments have done that very well during the COVID-19 area, promoting cigarette smoking and deconsumption. Great job they have done. Many, many social issues, suicide prevention, for example. I think sustainability can be one major platform that can be promoted. Awareness is increased by governments, and there you can have a global cooperation. It can be done by United Nations agencies, for example, or by each of the countries in many fashion. So increase awareness is very key. Educate to increase awareness that this is a serious matter. I think media are doing a good job recently, both streaming media as well as the regular broadcast media, because I hear more about those things. I pick up some good videos to show it in my class, for example, etc. Governments can offer economic incentives and disincentives, which is the other thing. As we are doing it for alternate energy, for example, electric cars, we are doing it right now, solar panels, we are doing it. In energy sectors, we are trying to very hard to shift reliance from oil and natural gas, thermal energy essentially, to non-thermal energy. And I think incentives are given for zero carbon credits. There are so many programs governments have. I think governments can continue doing that, motivating producers on the one hand, and motivating, of course, the consumers on the other hand. And a third one, and my favorite actually, and I have a whole series of papers on this one in Planned Social Change, implement mandatory rules and regulations. This is not a market-driven phenomenon. This would be a market-driving phenomenon. We say that the regulators and the companies have to get together, or each one of them can actually provide some guidelines. We have done a great job with smoking. Today, no corporations allow smoking in the building. No airlines allow smoking in the airplane. In public places, smoking is banned. Smoking is isolated as to where you can consume, for example, by location. And then you have these huge tax disincentives, charging cigarette smokers enormous taxes to again demotivate them to consume as much, etc. And if you look at the history of smoking, adult smoking, it has declined dramatically over time. In fact, in the US, more people have registered guns than smokers, which is mind-boggling change that we see in the society. My biggest focus is on consumption. I think mindful consumption is very key because, as I mentioned, 70% of all of the consumption, 70% of all the global warming happens at home. Home actually is putting a footprint we have never analyzed because all the materials in modern consumption are enormously based upon processed things. Not only energy itself, but the whole home is spewing a lot of energy. And in the next place, we have refrigerators, more than 2 per household now. But more importantly, next to that one are the supermarkets and convenience stores. They're putting footprint 24/7 with having refrigerators and freezers constantly running. And they're everywhere. These are hundreds of thousands of units. And as India, China is very modern, but India, Africa modernizes, puts modern supermarkets in place. This is a very key area of understanding. Last mile is the key area to understand, not the factory, is my view primarily. So what can we do to motivate the consumer to have a mindful consumption? First of all, enhance self-awareness. People don't know consequences of their consumption. Just making them aware. And now, as you know, in many communities, you have to sort out your garbage or waste into those which are renewable versus those which are not. There are mandatory rules, regulations coming in, but I think just increasing awareness, making people conscious of the consequences of their consumption, I think alone will go a long way. And I have a paper in one of the journals, which has done very, very well. It is basically, it is to sustain yourself. It is good for self, it is good for the environment, and it is good for the society. How can I do something that is good for me? The way we eat our foods, for example, the processed foods, etc., has an enormous long-term negative consequences as consumers from ourselves. We also have the same thing on the environment, etc. The next area is practice mindful consumption. In other words, typical 3 things we talk about is reduce, recycle, reuse, for example. And the last one is, and a very important one, which is part of marketing, is social media networks. I think social media and influencer marketing can be used very positively toward encouraging more and more mindful consumption. So mindful production, mindful policy, mindful consumption are 3 platforms with which we can do quite a lot. And I'm very optimistic that I know we always go through a crisis at the end of the cliff, and then we wake up and then we do very, very well in transition by and large. So overall, I think marketing has an enormous opportunity to contribute. As academics, I think this is a platform for research for a long period of time, especially with the use of technology, digital technology, even Chat GPT, for example. I'm supposed to use Chat GPT in my class as a positive force. I'm encouraging people to use it, but show it that they use it as a tool technique, pretty much so grunt work cannot be done. They can be more productive in the classroom, think more critically, etc., which is fascinating for a person of my age. Trying to teach GPT is interesting. So overall, I'm very optimistic about the future. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Jag. Those are interesting, really interesting comments. And You've raised a lot of points that I have comments on or questions really, and I'll bring those up and I'll look for those from the audience. Please, if you have some, please go ahead and put them in the comment chat box that you should have on your screen, and I will try to share as many as I can with Jag. And that was awesome. Thank you so much. Rebecca, the floor is yours. Thank you so much again for being with us today.
Great, thanks. Thank you very much. So morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. And I know it, as you said, it's 2 o'clock, I think, in the morning in Hawaii. So I feel like I'm the lucky one sitting here in London. It's 1:30 in the afternoon. Big thank you, Jag, Professor Sheff, for those great opening comments, and to Professor Oldham for hosting today. I'm really delighted to get the chance to join you all at RISM. So I was asked to talk a little bit around sustainable marketing, which I will come to. But before that, I just wanted to give you a bit of background on our overall sustainability strategy so that it makes a little bit more sense when I go on to talk about how we approach marketing. So at Unilever, and you can see this on our website, lots of information, we have an overall strategy called our Unilever Compass. And that's our sustainable business strategy that we have built to drive the growth of our business in a truly sustainable way. And the overarching purpose of Unilever is to make sustainable living commonplace. And we've done that because we believe that companies with people with purpose will last, people with purpose will thrive, our employees, and our brands with purpose will grow. And I know that's really what we're going to focus on during the conversation today. So just briefly on the Unilever Compass. So the Compass was put together, as I said, to enable us to have a North Star to grow our business. And so when you look at the Compass, you'll see, like any consumer goods business, there is a section around our portfolio, our brands, the key markets that we believe we should grow in, the key channels. But what you see peppered throughout the Unilever Compass is an overwhelming focus on sustainability, because we know that when we put sustainability front and center of how we orient our business, it enables us to build trust. It enables us to grow the business. It resonates very much with what people care about. There's a very big factor around it helps us to reduce risk in our business. You heard a lot just now from Jag talking about the impacts of climate change on sourcing, on global supply chains. So ensuring that we have a robust sustainability strategy helps to mitigate against that. And sometimes it saves money as well. The switch, for example, to renewable energy enables us as a business over the past 7 or 8 years to save nearly €1 billion. So what we've done in our Unilever Compass is to map out the really core important sustainability areas: climate action, biodiversity and regenerating nature, waste-free world, positive nutrition, health and well-being, equity, diversity and inclusion, raising living standards, and what we call the future of work. Really core sustainability areas, all underpinned by a focus on human rights. And underneath those big macro areas, we've identified 34 different, very specific commitments. So, for example, under climate, we talk about our net zero targets. Underneath health and well-being, we talk about how we'll reach 1 billion people with our water, sanitation and hygiene initiatives. Under raising living standards, we talk about our focus on achieving living wage right the way across our supply chain. Each of our Compass commitments is underpinned by a basis of preparation. So we're very clear on exactly what it is we're trying to achieve, how we'll achieve it, so how we'll measure it, and crucially, how we'll report on it. Very important to be totally transparent about the work that we're doing. And I think bringing that structure and rigor and transparency is absolutely key for the focus of today, which is around sustainable marketing. The way that we approach sustainability is always through 4 stages. We say we want to get our house in order. Then we say we work through our supply chain, our value chain, so from the farmers in the field, right the way through to our retailers. And of course, and I know we'll come on to this later, moving from a linear model much more towards a circular economy model, through our brand, which is really, really key to driving progress and enabling us to bring our commitments to life in an everyday way. So our brands say how we market our products, and our brand do how we actually bring that to life on the ground. And then the last part, which you heard Jag talking a little bit about, how do we then work within that wider ecosystem of stakeholders? So how do we work with others pre-competitively, for example, to stop deforestation in big global supply chains? How do we work with governments on the right areas of regulation to try and encourage a more proactive approach to sustainability, and so on and so forth? So critically important that we match up what our brands are actually talking about and how we bring that to life on the ground. It might be, for example, with our biggest food brand, Keynote, we've shifted a lot of our sourcing now to farmers who've adopted regenerative agriculture practices, and we bring that to life with consumers through things, for example, like our Future 50 initiative. So a report that we issued a couple of years ago with Eat Lancet, which addresses 50 key foods we should all be eating to help biodiversity, and as we heard Jag talking about, better for our health and also better for the environment. So we highlight our products that contain those Future 50 ingredients, and we help consumers, whether they're online or in store, to bring that to life through things like recipe ideas, or brands like Dove, where for many years we've really been challenging the conventional interpretations of beauty through the advertising campaigns that we've launched around the world. We bring that to life on the ground with self-esteem programs. We've reached hundreds of thousands of young girls now around the world. And of course, we bring that to life through our advertising and advocacy programs. So how do we ensure that our sustainability initiatives and our marketing and brand positions resonate with our target audience? Because we want to ensure that we're addressing issues that are important to the demographic that we're serving around the world. And we want to make sure that we can encourage and help sustainable consumption, as you've just heard Jag talking a lot about in his opening address. So in order to do that, we use a metric called brand power. So that's our sort of headline measure of the mental availability or the consumer predisposition to buy a brand. And we know that strong brand power leads to brand growth. So when we look at how does that brand purpose correlate so strongly with brand growth, we see a couple of really important trends coming out. If a brand and its products are perceived as poor, even if we put lots of purpose behind the brand positioning and we've tried to bring that to life with the advertising, of course, it's not going to sell. It's absolutely essential that if you want to adopt purpose, you want to try and address some of these environmental and social causes that Jag was talking about and that we extensively talk about at Unilever across our Compass agenda, then a brand needs to be strong on value. It needs to be a good quality product, delivering at a good price, ensuring that you are giving our consumers a really strong brand that delivers on its proposition. Once a brand is strong on the proposition that it's delivering, then it's where the extra part comes in, its values, its purpose. That's how you accelerate growth. So be strong on value, deliver what your consumers want, and then add on the values on top of that, the purpose part. So we deliver on sustainability right the way across our products. It might be through product innovation, coming up with new and exciting, more sustainably oriented innovation. So for example, we're taking all of the fossil fuel derived carbon out of our home care portfolio. So delivering a really high quality product that delivers premium cleaning, but in a way that is kind to the environment because we've taken out that fossil fuel based carbon. Thinking about the packaging, and I know we're going to come on to talk a little bit more about circular economy a bit later, and thinking about the partnerships that we have on the ground that really bring everything that our brand stands for to life. So we don't believe or want, and we know that consumers can't afford to pay extra. They can't afford to pay a green premium. Instead, we know very much that we put purpose and sustainability on top of quality and trust because they are the prerequisites for purpose, for purchase, and that helps to drive our brand preference. So I know we'll talk a little bit more about that when we're talking about circular economy later. And the reason that we do all of this is because we want to put sustainability front and center of our business. And we know that if we want to enable and encourage consumers to adopt more sustainable consumption patterns, we need to be mindful that many consumers, many of us around the world, are skeptical of what they see as companies greenwashing when it comes to brand positioning on sustainability. It's absolutely integral that we're transparent and that we build trust with our consumers. Some recent research that came out, I think from Kantar, showed that half of consumers globally are cynical when they see companies talking about sustainability, but not actually delivering on sustainability. They don't want to just see eco claims on a product that could just be perceived as another marketing tool. They want to see tangible action on the ground. And so it's really important that companies address that, and that we talk about meaningful actions that we're taking on sustainability that really resonate with our target audiences across our brands. It's important for us from a competitive perspective, standing out from our competition, and making sure that we continue to live and breathe in an authentic and integrated way. So again, it's this conversation on right quality and price and on values. So it's probably, I think, 4 ways that we look at how we drive from brand preference through our marketing while we're maintaining that absolute truth and being consistent on value and values. So the first is around inclusion. The second is around authentic action. The third is around making sustainable choices accessible. And the fourth is really around transparency. So I've talked a little bit about the 4 stages at Unilever: get your own house in order, work through your supply chain, work through your brands, and then amplify through wider society. So when we come to our brands, the focus of today's conversation on sustainable marketing, if I look at inclusion, for example, absolutely critical and key. We talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion in our own business. So we get our own house in order, as well as across society. We made a commitment, for example, that 5% of our workforce is almost comprised of people who self-identify as having some kind of disability. We bring that to life through our brands by making sure that we put that lens onto our innovation funnel. So with Degree, we recently launched in the US a deodorant antiperspirant that is specifically designed for people with disabilities. When we talk about authentic action, it's really important that we're tackling real-world issues that go beyond just a simple one-time charitable donation. So again, if I think about equity and diversity and inclusion and how that shows up in the many different ways that Unilever targets and does our recruitment, taking the bias out of the recruitment process, we bring that to life, for example, through brands like Dove. So in 2019, Dove co-founded the Crown Coalition in partnership with the National Urban League, Colour of Change and Western Centre on Law and Poverty to advance anti-hair discrimination and legislation across a number of states in the US. In the third area around making sustainable choices accessible, we know that when we educate and empower people to change their consumption habits, as we've just heard Jag talking about, with small incremental changes without disrupting their daily routines too much, it enables us to ensure much more sustainable consumption. So as an example, in our own business, we made a big commitment to halve food waste across our operations. And then with our brands, we're bringing that to life, for example, through brands like Hellmann's that really make or eliminating food waste and ensuring that you're using up leftover bits of food in your fridge, really front and center now of Hellmann's brand positioning. You might have seen, for example, US listeners on the line, the work or the advertising that Hellmann's did at the recent Super Bowl. And I think that also links into what Jag was saying around looking at how do you incorporate behavior change into the brand positioning. We've done a lot of work over the years, particularly on water, sanitation and hygiene, looking at how we can encourage positive behavior change around things like washing hands. So we know that when we encourage consumers to wash hands 5 times a day, that the really crucial points when you've been to the bathroom, before you're making food, that it's one of the most critical things that we can do from a good preventative health perspective, particularly in developing and emerging markets. And we've developed a theory of behavior change around make it understandable, make it easy, make it desirable, make it rewarding, and make it simple habit. And we try to incorporate that again into the way that we do our marketing and advertising. So we have a long-term commitment with Lifebuoy to encourage people to wash their hands 5 times a day. We have similar initiatives with our oral care brands, encouraging people to clean their teeth twice a day. And where you incorporate that into the advertising with very tangible programs to encourage people to adopt those simple everyday changes, we know that it can have a really positive impact. And then on the last area around transparency and around traceability, really ensuring, again, that we are bringing that to life in the way that we conduct our business. So, for example, I talked earlier around the importance of a deforestation-free supply chain and those crops and commodities that, if wrongly sourced, can very much contribute to deforestation: palm oil, paper and board, soy, cocoa. We're partnering with organizations like Google and Microsoft to ensure that we're able to track everything that is going on in our supply chain through geo-tagging, geo-location tracking, to ensure that we're able to guarantee deforestation free across all of those different parts of our supply chain. And then we bring that to life through brands like Keynote, where we're able to guarantee or talk about transparency in our supply chain with our consumers. So I would sum up by saying it's not about tokenism at all in the way that we choose to approach sustainability in marketing. It's absolutely essential that brands and companies are very genuine and they back up the positioning of their brands with really concrete, tangible actions on the ground. So I'll stop there. It's a topic I'm hugely passionate about, and I could talk about for hours.
That's great. Well, that's fantastic. Very nice. Both of you guys have amazing comments that are just so insightful and so helpful. I'm, as a researcher, academic nerd, I'm writing down like 15 research questions I want to start studies on now based on the things you guys have written. So I hope others are doing the same. You know, we have a lot of questions from people. I'd like to get a couple in, but before we do that, we have about 15 minutes left. I wondered if either one of you wanted to say something to each other, any kind of interaction there, or would you like to just rather go to questions from the audience? And just so you know, we have over 500 people registered and another 1,000 or so on LinkedIn. So so there's a lot of people out there, and they're not all here yet, but many of them are. So Jag and Rebecca, was there a question you wanted to give to each other? You can each take a minute or two on, or do you want to go right to what the audience is asking?
Rebecca, go ahead, please.
Okay, so let me start with Jag. Jag, I thought this was pretty interesting because of your background and where you were raised, where you grew up. The question was how to reach youth who are in countries like India and others. And I've done a lot of work on global branding and global consumer culture, so I'm pretty familiar with this area. How do we reach those youth who value consumption patterns that are being pushed, the materialistic consumption patterns that are being pushed by global corporations, not by Unilever, but by many others, to have a car, to have the latest fashion? You know, how do we reach? And then related to that, is there a way to make, and Rebecca, you can probably jump in on this too, sustainable consumption more acceptable to people with lower economic resources? So those are the two questions that I'll put out to you both.
The first part is relatively easy.
Okay.
The large multinational corporation, we take a global strategy and we would like to be consistent across nations. You know, like think global, act global. Then we learned over time that because of regulations or access to supply chain, whatever reason, we need to localize. So we came out with a phrase, glocal, think global, act local, which is very common nowadays. But there's a new concept, which I think multinationals can benefit quite a lot, which is think local, act global. There's lots of things happening in emerging economies. Most of the street vendors have great recipes, but they don't know how to brand it, scale it, etc. And that little product in a little corner of a small town in India or in China or in Africa especially can become a global brand. As we have seen in drinks, beverages quite a lot. I think that paradigm of think local, act global may be a very important way to manage localization in many ways. I think that's one thing. More recently with the COVID-19, every corporation that I know, for example, has simply said, we cannot depend on one global sourcing for a component or one global sourcing for a raw material, even though it may be cheap or expensive. Let's say palm oil. or coconut oil, whatever it is. We have to have a distributed supply chain so that we don't have all the eggs in one basket, as we saw. And that goes not only for raw materials, that goes for production, that goes for storage, and definitely logistics. So I think thinking like that would be another thing as a way of managing it. I have become, and now Rebecca, I'm taking a little longer time, so bear with me, please. I've become very fond of doing the reverse. I watch nature and see what I can do. I emulate nature. Here is the reason. I'm a vegetarian by birth, remain vegetarian, which is common among many Indians. And we used to have a garbage disposal. So we have lots of fruits, vegetables, waste. One day I decided rather than throw away, let me take it, put it in, just extra effort, put it in a container and put it out in my backyard. Within 24 hours, it's gone. Somebody found its use, what I thought was my waste. I began to watch what birds come in, what animals come in. I mean, the nature is the best waste manager. Can we industrialize it? Can we think like nature? When there's a big kill in African safari, for example, there's nothing wasted. Once the animal is killed, not only the predator eats properly whatever they want to eat, but there are a bunch of other people, and the vultures come in and clean it. We have not thought about learning from nature what we can do. We have done that in processed foods to some extent, vitamins. We make it in the factories now, what plant-based things were done. I think that's another area would be very key. Think local, act global, and what can we learn from nature may be a very valuable lesson. Now, before Rebecca talks, I do want to mention one thing. I'm very fond of Unilever for a very simple reason. Paul Polman made a transformation to a level that none of us imagined. I watched the commercial they made, Adding Purpose, which is based upon one of our books called Forms of Endearment, Conscious Capitalism. But more interestingly, that video on YouTube was watched by 1 billion people. It moves you. It adds an emotional dimension on a product which is hugely functional. Washing hands with dirty work that you do in agriculture on the one hand, but more in the industrial raw materials like oil, etc. It's really a product that is, people thought there's no life anymore. And Lifebuoy as a product, they revitalized to a level that was incredible. You have to watch those commercials. You have to show in the classroom or in our research, those commercials are world-class and they make a difference. I just wanted to mention that, Rebecca. I like to do that thing. I cry sometimes when I watch that commercial about the Indian father, it's interesting to watch. So please, your comments.
Okay. So Rebecca, maybe you could address the issue of, there's two that are really related. One is, how does Unilever emphasize demarketing, not necessarily to consume less, although that would be part of it, I think, but also to repair, recycle, reuse, to sharing economy. And then how do we cater or tailor or alter our messages so that we can, or perhaps provide subsidies or whatever it is to help people who have limited resources also participate in sustainable consumption?
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you, Jag, for those kind comments.
About great answer, Jag. Thank you.
Yeah, very kind. So, I mean, I think one of the very important things for all of us to think about is, and particularly working in consumer goods, how do we change what was very much a linear industry into a circular economy approach? So for many years, fast-moving consumer goods meant sourcing something in a country, manufacturing it, coming up with a brand positioning, putting it into a retailer, and then selling a product, and then that product and packaging was disposed of. And of course, now we all know it's all of our collective responsibilities to think about, actually, well, let's change that from what was a linear model into circular. And of course, that means looking at that right the way across your business, whether we're talking about plastics and packaging, whether we're talking about food waste, whether we're talking about our ingredients. So plastics, plastic was a revolutionary material when it was launched back in the 50s and 60s. But of course, we know that we need all of us to ensure that it stays in our economy and that it doesn't end up as waste, polluting water or polluting land around the world. So of course, what we need to look at is how do we use less plastics? So from an innovation perspective, really important that we think, for example, around how do we have one cleaning bottle, of brand like Sif, which is a surface cleaner across many, a big Unilever brand across many parts of the world. Instead of now buying a big bottle every time you need the cleaner, in fact, you buy the bottle just once and then you buy a tiny little concentrated refill, which of course is made of recycled plastic and itself is recyclable. And you put that into the original carton and you just top it up with water. Now, how do we make sure that we change consumer behaviors to get used to refill and reuse? And for us, that means thinking about how do we, for example, we're doing a big project in the moment in the UK where we have returnable stainless steel bottles for things like laundry detergents with a QR code on the bottom, so that we ask consumers to help us to track when that bottle is coming back into store to being refilled, so that we start to understand how we can best ensure that we set up the most convenient and most user-friendly approach to people reusing the same bottles or cartons that they've been using before. And then how can we as well, because we need to really approach this from a much wider ecosystem perspective, how can we work pre-competitively with others in consumer goods and with our retailers and with governments on a recycling infrastructure? Because it's really important that when we all finish using products that we're using, that we're able to put that packaging into an infrastructure where we're living in towns and cities around the world, and make sure that that is then collected, and we can encourage this reuse, recycle approach that is absolutely critical for us. So we're working on a whole host of different systems and projects at the moment around the world to ensure that we're able to do that and we're able to keep packaging in the system. It also is relevant when it comes to things like food waste. So for example, on our own production lines, we now have a brand called Cremissio. So unused and unspoiled ice cream that would traditionally have been left over when we're changing over on our production lines is now kept in that production lines. We put in additional ingredients, and we've now created a new brand called Cremissio Chocolate Hero that's made up from 40% of what would have been wasted ice cream. I talked a little bit about Hellmann's before, encouraging consumers to be more resourceful with their food and turn leftovers into further meals so that they're wasting less. You heard Chef at the beginning talking about actually the huge carbon emissions that come from wasted food. I talked a bit about, from an ingredients perspective, how we're now looking at recycling carbon across our home care portfolio. So I think it's around making sure in our own innovations, in the work that we're doing with our suppliers, and in the way that we enable consumers to adopt an approach that is easy to take on in their everyday lives, to this circular economy model, rather than this old-fashioned linear approach to consumption, that we're able, hopefully, to encourage more responsible consumption.
That's a great answer. So facilitation. And Jag, did you want to comment on that, or did you?
No, I mean, it's fantastic.
Agreement.
Yeah.
Okay, I got a couple. I think we have time for two more. Go ahead, Jag, and then I got two more questions I think we can get out before we're done.
I'm just appreciating, enjoying Rebecca's own passion. Unless the leader has a passion, nothing will happen in the corporation. So this is great.
So Rebecca, we have a lot of actually students across the world, around the world, and Unilever's global. So and a lot of these students, and I've seen it at the University of Hawaii, my sustainable marketing class sells out now every semester, and there's a ton of interest among Gen Z people. And millennials in this area, obviously. I mean, they're the ones most at risk, so they get it. But one of the questions is, for concerned sustainability concerned business students who want to join a global company and make a difference with their graduation or after their graduation, what kinds of jobs are their options, and what skill sets are you looking for?
Well, firstly, great, because I love to hear the enthusiasm for people to come and work in sustainability. But, I know at Unilever, one of the main reasons people come is because they want to work in a company that puts sustainability front and center. And I'd say today's students coming out of university are very well equipped because the learnings and the understanding around things like the Sustainable Development Goals and the role of business in being able to contribute to solving some of these big macro level problems is far greater. You know, when I graduated 900 years ago, I studied international politics. Sustainability didn't exist even as a discipline. You know, I moved into that area. So I'd say, firstly, you know, passion and drive to understand how in the business world you can contribute to solving these kind of problems. I think an understanding of, from a content perspective, you know, these big issues around climate change, around water availability, around equity, diversity and inclusion, and how as a private sector organization, you can start to see the opportunity to build partnerships together with government, together with retailers, together with NGOs to try and address some of these issues. Please do reach out to me, get in contact. I know we're very short on time to discuss in more detail now, but I'd be delighted to help out anyone who is interested.
Do you have an internship program by any chance for?
We do have internships at Unilever offices all around the world. Some internships. And we also take as well, perhaps this is a more European thing, but I think in the Americas too, a number of university students who do 4-year courses and they come in and they work for Unilever in their 3rd year and then they go back to university again in the 4th year, but all sorts of different internships. We also have a grad program and apprenticeship program, because I have to add, this isn't just about targeting university students. We also take apprentice students who have brilliant life experiences, who come up with great ideas of how we can connect with our target audience and target consumers. So yeah, very keen to hear from young people.
Okay, great. And Jag, we have 2 minutes left, but I think it's a very important question. I'd love your comments on it. It's about startups. And the question is, I'm concerned about how challenging it can be to implement sustainable strategies in startup companies. I wonder if it makes daily operations cheaper or more expensive than usual. And what steps do you think startups should take to become responsible companies right from the get-go in terms of sustainability?
I think startups actually have a better opportunity because there are no incumbency curse. There's no curse of incumbency. It's plain slate. It's having a conscious mind and maybe an expert who can guide them through the process. Because most of the startups are usually by young people. If you have some experienced person from the sustainability perspective, that can be built into the business plan. And surprisingly, because we have done that at IIT Bombay, for example, in India, in a massive way, most of these are brilliant young engineers. And we inculcate the idea about adding in the startup businesses, pretty much the notion of sustainability, or in general, you know, the environmental issues in some fashion. And I think more venture capital is coming up now. And you had the social venture capital, and you had the typical free market capital. Today, they are blending together very well. In other words, business with a social purpose is more considered investable than business without a purpose.
Right. Okay.
So in many ways, it's actually the other way around, I would think.
So right from the get-go, just make it part of the business plan.
So the best opportunity is in the startup business.
All right. Fantastic. You guys, you've been fantastic, and I really, really appreciate you being here. What a great way to start RISM 2023. It's been a pleasure, and I'm just so excited to have you. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today. We got to run. We have our first concurrent paper session starting now. So folks, we will record all your other comments. We have lots of other comments, by the way. We will share those with our speakers, and we will put them out on our website when it's functional again, or somewhere else, so you can get it, and they may or may not be able to get back to you, but we'll share them with our speakers. All right. Thank you again, Rebecca Marmont and Jay Sheth. You guys are awesome. Love the work you're doing.
Good luck with the rest of your conference. Bye.
Thank you so much. Take care now. Aloha.
Aloha.
Take care, Jag. We'll see you in August.
Yes.